Many thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. See, I used to think I was doing everything right. The location was perfect, the light was beautiful, and I followed all the rules. But when I looked at my photos at home, they just didn't feel like what I experienced when I was on location. It was super frustrating. I spent years trying to fix it. New gear, new techniques. I tried literally anything that might help, but nothing made a difference. It wasn't until nearly a decade in that I finally realized what I was missing, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. In this video, I'll show you exactly what it was and how you can immediately improve your photos by capturing this in your own work. But before we can fix this, we need to understand the big problem with photography. See, photography tries to capture a three-dimensional world using a two-dimensional medium. See, that's the disconnect. So how do we make our images feel more like what we actually experienced out in the field? Let's dive in, and I'll start with two of the most well-known and effective techniques to bring your photos to life. This is probably one of the very best examples of this technique in practice, and it's the basic premise of using layers in your image to create depth. So this right here has a clear foreground element. This image has a clear midground element, and this image also has a clear background element. All of them are stacked literally right on top of each other. This is a perfect real-world example of this. But using foreground, midground, and background creates that depth. And if we go back to what the problem with photography is an art form that is meant to capture the three-dimensional world that we live in, but it's a two-dimensional art form. So how do we create that depth in our photographs? Here's another amazing example of this. One of my favorite fall images where you have a clear foreground area right through here, waterfall in the midground, and the mill in the background. Once again, foreground, the bridge is the midground, the trees and the mountain are the background. Right here, once again, foreground, midground, background. This is what creates that depth. This is what creates the illusion of depth, is having those layers in a photograph. If you've ever been to an amazing overlook, I feel like the Grand Canyon is a perfect example of this. It's absolutely jaw-dropping when you see it, but it's very difficult to photograph, and it's often because it's somewhat difficult to get layers or create depth in images, or those huge sweeping vistas or those overlook. That's why a lot of those images are generally hard to capture or hard to accurately resemble what you felt when you were on location, because it lacks that foreground, that midground, and the background. Doesn't mean you have to have that in every single photograph, but that is one of the many techniques we're going to discuss in this video that helps you to create the illusion of depth in a photograph that really brings it to life. Another one of the most common ways, and I know that you have heard this before as well, but it's the use of leading lines. This is a great example of it from Colorado, where you have the fence post coming from the bottom left-hand corner and kind of zigzagging through the frame up here to the sunburst in the background. Another great example, a very, very old photograph from the Outer Banks of North Carolina, but you have a very clear leading line that leads your eye through the image from the foreground into the midground, into the background where this beautiful lighthouse is and this incredible sunrise is happening. Once again, it could just be a little path in a photograph, just kind of winding your eye throughout the scene, or it could be the ocean. This is one of my favorite techniques at the coast, is when the waves or the tide recedes. You know, the waves come in, when the tide goes out, take a longer exposure, and you get these beautiful lines that kind of pull your eye into the scene. And this is a wonderful example of it right here. It just kind of draws the viewer's eye from the foreground into the midground area, into the background where the sun is setting, where the brightest part of the frame is, which is generally where the eye likes to go to first in a scene, is trying to travel to the brightest area of a photograph. Now, this next example here, or next technique, is something that I call natural framing. I didn't coin this phrase. I've heard it called natural framing many times, but it's a fantastic technique to use to create the illusion of depth in a photograph. This is a great example of it, using these huge trees on the left and right center to not only balance the overall photograph, but to create this natural frame where you have the waterfall pouring into the background. So using natural framing is a fantastic way to create this illusion of depth as well. Another example, I think I shared this in a video recently. This is from just a few weeks ago in the Smoky Mountains. One of the very few wildlife photographs I'm somewhat proud of, but I really like the way that this one came out. But once again, by using the leaves right through here as a natural frame to frame obviously the main subject of the photograph, which is this super cute black bear just sitting in the tree right here. But natural framing is an amazing technique. Once again, this is one from Colorado, and I like this example here because I think that natural framing doesn't always have to be framed in front of your subject. In this scene right here, these trees are actually pretty much the same distance away as the color around it, but it creates this illusion that the autumn color right here, the gold is in these trees from Colorado, is framing the subject of these beautiful aspen trees, the tree trunks in the midground of the frame. So natural framing can be done in multiple different ways. And I think this is another great example here where I feel that this image is a good example of using a lot of the techniques that we've just mentioned in this video already, those first three techniques of using depth, or I should say using layers, using leading lines, and using natural framing. And I'll show you what I mean right here. So right here, you could say that there is a leading line leading from this rock to this rock to this rock all the way in. So that's a pretty strong leading line. You also have layers in this photograph. You have clear foreground elements right here. You have a very clear midground element right here. And you also have a clear background element right here. So that creates that illusion of depth as well. And you also have natural framing with these trees kind of overarching from the left side of the frame arching over, and then from the right side of the frame arching over, creating this kind of cathedral look in the background. And that is a great use of natural framing as well. So I think it's important to understand that whenever you're composing a photograph to create depth, it's not, I want to stick with this one technique. I only want to use layers, or I only want to use leading lines, or I only want to use natural framing. A lot of these techniques can be used at the same time, and I think the more of these techniques you can combine in a single image, oftentimes that leads to a more powerful composition. And I think that this is a great example of it right here. Now, another amazing technique is something called focus pulling. And it basically using different aperture levels to put certain areas of your frame in focus and certain areas of your frame out of focus. And that kind of pulls your eye throughout the scene. I don't have a ton of examples of this. This is something that I hope to work on this year and next year and in the future to create more images like this. But I do have some I want to share with you of this puffin. This is in Iceland actually. But having the foreground element right here completely out of focus, the background is out of focus, and the only thing that's in focus is really just the puffin right here. And that creates a lot of depth in this photograph for me. And I really, really enjoy it. Not only does it make the image seem a little bit more depth, it really, have a little bit more depth, but it makes the puffin really, really stand out and really pop. Another example, this is a puffin from the Faroe Islands actually, but once again, the foreground is completely out of focus, the background is out of focus, and only the puffin shows through. If you could imagine if everything in this scene was in sharp focus, it wouldn't quite have as much depth to it. But by putting certain areas of your scene in focus and certain areas of your scene out of focus, that puts everything in it creates the illusion of a little bit more depth. So using focus pulling is another amazing example of it. And I think it really, really worked well here. Now, another example, or I should say another technique that you can use to create depth in a photograph is by using items of scale or elements of scale. That is a great way to create depth as well. This is a good example from the Highlands of Iceland. This is actually me running up this hill here. I went up these stairs and started to kind of walk up here and captured a photo of me doing that. But once again, if you were to remove me from this photograph, this image wouldn't quite have as much depth to it. But I really think that this is a fantastic example of it. Once again, there's multiple different techniques in play in this one photograph. We have different layers. We have foreground, we have midground, and we have background. You have leading lines, you have the stair leading in, you have this kind of winding area right through here, that's leading lines. Natural framing, maybe not so much. Focus pulling, not so much, but we also have scale. So this photograph has layers, it has leading lines, it has scale. There's a lot of good things from a compositional perspective in this photograph that helps it create that illusion of depth. Another good example of this family right through here on this rowboat just cruising along. But once again, if you could imagine, I wish I actually should have taken this image and removed the boat and compared the two. But if you could imagine if this wasn't here, this image wouldn't, one, have nearly as much scale because you wouldn't have any idea how grand these trees are or the mountain or anything like that. But this right here, once again, adds a lot of depth to the photograph. It adds scale, obviously. The scale is in the foreground, and you have the midground, and then you have the background. So a lot of elements in play right here. Another example right here, having a little bit of scale. Not only does it show how grand an area is, but it adds that illusion of depth. Now, this is an interesting one here because a lot of times people might think, or I used to think, I should say, that a reflection really isn't foreground, but I think a reflection is absolutely foreground. It really draws the viewer's eye into the scene. Plus, one of my favorite aspects of a reflection is it creates a very harmonious, a very balanced, a very simplistic photograph. It's really easy and attractive to look at. And then when you can add a little bit of scale to it, I think it works very, very well. Just another couple quick examples of scale right through here with a little bit of foreground, midground, and background. It's always nice to have all three together. And one more quick example, leading line through the image, foreground, midground, background with a little bit of scale. I think you can start to see a theme here where whenever you can use multiple of these depth techniques in a photograph, oftentimes the more powerful it can actually be. Now, the final technique I want to mention, and these are not the only 6 techniques out there, but these are the 6 techniques that I use most often. And the last one is atmosphere. Atmosphere is an amazing way to create depth. Generally speaking, more atmosphere is usually in the back of your photograph or in the background of an image, and the foreground has a little bit less atmosphere. So that right there naturally adds a little bit of depth to a photograph. This is another image from the Smoky Mountains from just a couple weeks ago. Tons of atmosphere in the scene, but you can see that the area in the background here definitely has more atmosphere than the area in the foreground, and it just adds a lot of depth to this overall photograph. Once again, this is another image from Bali, but you can see a little bit of atmosphere in the background here, and you can see that there's clearly no atmosphere in the foreground, and that adds a little bit of depth to the overall photograph. One final image, once again, from Smoky Mountains. This is barely an edited photo, nowhere close to being complete, but I thought it was a good example because it does have absolutely incredible atmosphere. It's got layers, foreground, midground, background, actually has multiple layers, 4 or 5 layers. Also have a little bit of scale right through here with this curve in the road. Happen to get a car driving through it. Once again, a lot of things at work. And I think that is always a beautiful thing when you can combine multiple of these things together. Now, like I mentioned, you don't have to have any of these in your photograph. It doesn't mean that just because you don't have one of these depth techniques, your image is horrible. It absolutely does not mean that at all. But once again, I had mentioned the big problem with photography, it's meant to capture the 3-dimensional world we live in, but it's a 2-dimensional medium. It is just a print or a Polaroid or a digital photograph, whatever the case may be, but it lacks depth. How do you bring that back? These 6 techniques are a great way to help you do that. So I hope that information was helpful. Before I do wrap things up here, I just want to say a huge thanks to the sponsor of this week's video, which is Squarespace, who I use for all of my website and e-commerce needs. Squarespace offers a stunning, user-friendly platform to build your website. With their Blueprint AI design system, you can showcase your photography and create a standout online presence with ease. Plus, built-in Squarespace SEO tools help your site appear in more searches, making it easier for the right customers to find you. And if you're looking to sell online, Squarespace's online store feature provides everything you need to sell your physical goods, digital content, or services seamlessly. So if you're looking to start a new website or possibly upgrade your current website, check out squarespace.com/Mark Denney for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase. If you have any questions about anything covered in this week's video, please leave those in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as humanly possible. And if you enjoyed this week's video, if you could give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.